the way we think about energy is that it is the story of human progress. Everything that we've seen going throughout our lives and the history before us has been by leaps and bounds done by energy. So even in America, we're on the very front edge of what is happening with this emergent grid. But it doesn't just happen here, it needs to happen everywhere.
It's our privilege to welcome Erik Hersman.
So like many of you, I grew up in rural Africa, and in my case, it was in a small community in South Sudan. And I still remember, because we didn't have any electricity or water, when they first dug this borehole. And the reason why that was important was before that, there was a well that was dug in the Sand River each year before the rains. And we would bring water up in a bucket, and we would have to filter it, and that's how we got our drinking water. So this changed not just our lives, but everybody's life in the community. And I think it's why today, when I think of things like electricity, I find it so important. It's not just a convenience. So the way we think about energy is that it is the story of human progress. Everything that we've seen going throughout our lives and the history before us has been by leaps and bounds done by energy. It doesn't matter if it's productivity, it doesn't matter if it's healthcare, it doesn't matter if it's education or security. Energy is what drives it. So we found a small energy site in rural Malawi, in Bondo, and one of the problems that they'd had was they only used about 30% of their electricity. So grades had become better, health had improved, security was better, productivity went up because they could now irrigate their fields, but they still had a problem, right? Is that there was too much energy and they couldn't use it all. And this is the big problem in places like Africa, is that we have the ability to build the energy, but the communities can't use it all. So if you build energy in a very rural part of Africa, who's going to be your anchor tenant? Who's going to take up that excess electricity? The answer is usually nobody. So in our company, Gridless, we now have 6 sites across 3 countries, in Kenya, Malawi, and Zambia. And what we do is we find these places that have either run-of-river hydro, biomass, geothermal. Many of them have solar on them as well. And the energy company who had built that originally had built it and thought that the community would go to a certain level. But the problem that you have is that when you're in a poor African community, people first buy LED light bulbs, maybe they'll charge their phone, and that just doesn't use a lot of electricity. It takes years before you start buying refrigerators and TVs. So we come in, and within 3 days, we dropped a 20-foot container in, and all of a sudden, the company that set up that energy actually has enough economic activity to expand. What that means for them is very simple, right? We end up being the economic shock absorber. We come in there as a buyer of last resort, and we do a rev share, right? So we don't even pay them cash for their electricity. Instead, they get a share of the Bitcoin that we earn. You can see in the picture here the small 20-foot container up in the corner. That alone changed the lives of these communities. So, for example, this one is in Zambia on the Zambezi River. And in this case, they went from not being able to pay their line workers, not being able to fix transformers, not being able to buy new meters to put into homes. And they were able to change that completely within 1 year's time, adding another 400 households to their grid. And in our world, that means reducing the amount of Bitcoin that we can mine all the time, right? So then we move those miners somewhere else, and we continue to do this, and we continue to grow our network. So Letitia is one of the ladies who lives in this community. And it's really interesting if you go sit and talk with her. It used to be that when the sun went down, things went quiet, right? The day ended. Now that she has lights, people still come to her house. They notice that there's a TV there. That means that her husband doesn't disappear to the village 20 kilometers away to watch the Premier League football for the weekend. And the wives are all very happy that their husbands are staying closer to home. The refrigerator that she has changes the health of her family. Means that she can store food for longer. All these things change and mean something at a very personal level. But as you sit here and listen to all this, you're like, well, didn't he say that this is something about America's energy future too? Well, and the interesting thing is I think they're part of the same, maybe the opposite sides of the same coin. Where in Africa, we have 600 million people who don't have electricity. The grid's not going to reach them. And so we have to go build new energy where it's needed and where the energy is abundant. In the US, we have the opposite problem. Here, we have a lot of energy that's going to waste. It's curtailed. We have, and we'll jump into the numbers here, right? We have in Midwest, we have 800 megawatts of wind curtailed every hour in 2023. 30% of all wind is wasted. In California, we have 3.4 terawatt hours of solar and wind curtailed in 2024. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a 13% below average use on the generation of hydro. In Texas, by the year 2035, it's projected to curtail 19% of solar and 13% of wind. That's huge. What we've done is we've created these massive stadiums, and we're using them a few times a year. We're wasting the resources that have been built. So it was through conversations with some friends, we were talking about both the problems in Africa and the problems in the US that I came up with this concept that I call the emergent grid. And really the emergent grid is just saying, you put compute where there's intermittent or need of new renewable energy. That's it. And it comes with these three pillars. The first is just find the distributed renewable energy generation and build it where it's needed. The second is add flexible compute loads to those same sites. The economic stabilizer and the buyer of last resort. The third thing is local intelligence. This is a new pillar, right? This is the digital brain that helps connect everything. So think of this more like an ant colony or the internet itself, where there's no central creator that's shaping everything. Instead, you have this emerging modular autonomous sites that are built that can connect to each other automatically and grow from there. And it's already happening. It shouldn't sound too foreign to you, right? So what we see with Crusoe over the last couple of years, is them building 1.2 gigawatts of AI data centers in Texas to capture stranded energy. Armada is a really great company that's building these modular compute data centers that can be moved anywhere. Applied Digital is building a $3 billion, 280 megawatt AI campus in North Dakota, heart of the wind belt. And Greenlight is locating compute where there is excess power or capacity. So even in America, we're on the very front edge of what is happening with this emergent grid. But it doesn't just happen here, it needs to happen everywhere. So the one thing that I think has been missing for most of us is a way to think about this, right? It's not that it's a new concept, it's that we don't have a frame yet. And so the way I started thinking about it was this kind of gig economy. So over the past 100 years, our energy has acted like a little bit like a mid company in America where you've got these 9-to-5 workers who come in. So that's the guys providing the energy. We know what it is, it's very standard, it's very command and control oriented. But what's been happening over the past decade or two is that we've got all these millions of unpredictable part-time freelancers in the form of solar, wind, other intermittent power. And they only come to work when the sun's out and the wind's blowing. So what we need in response to that is a flexible compute load that can be our army of gig workers who respond to that in real time. They can suck up as much or not, however much time is needed in order to fulfill the demands on that energy load. So I think the lessons I've learned in Kenya really do apply here. First is the old way, right, of this decade-long, multi-billion-dollar transmission projects. They'll still need to be there. We're still going to have those. But we also need to come up with a new way of deploying these modular, targeted solutions where we can go in months, not years. And we see this in Africa. So these private mini-grids that we're building out in Africa are 2 to 3 times cheaper than the larger sites, and we can build them 2 to 3 times faster. Lesson number 2 is that we need to stop wasting our waste. This is largely a US problem. The scale of waste is economically absurd, and the curtailed electrons can and should be used. Again, what Crusoe's been doing with oil and gas is really interesting. There's examples of this all over the US already. We need to continue doing that. And finally, we need to make this grid intelligent. This is the really new bit. How do we make this old grid that was one way, how do we make it multi-directional? How do we mesh it so that they can all speak to each other and the compute loads can be shared across them? So we need to make the demand as flexible as the supply is variable. So when I was looking at this, I thought ultimately the problem and the solution are the same. The compute is the bridge from wasted energy to a resilient, sovereign energy future, whether you're in Africa or you're in America. Thank you.